When Helldivers 2 launched, there was massive excitement in the gaming community. I remember logging in on day one and the chaos was perfect. The promise of diving into alien-infested worlds, coordinating with your team to survive against swarms of terminids and automatons, and using a vast arsenal of stratagems felt like a breath of fresh air in the world of co-op horde shooters. Many of us were sucked in, at least 12 million of us were sucked in, playing hours upon hours, grinding for those perfect war bonds, mastering our favorite loadouts, and fighting our way up the difficulties. It was a time when the potential of this game felt literally endless. During the early months, it was all about experimenting. I remember when the breaker shotgun was king. I mean, you could take out enemies from far away, from close up, it had enough ammo, it just felt so good. And then the railgun was so powerful it could even take out a Bile Titan. I remember those days. Do you remember? Playing with friends was so much fun. We could mow down swarms of enemies, drop turrets in strategic spots, and time our airstrikes perfectly. The game was alive, and so was the community. There were endless debates about which stratagems worked best for which missions, and the variety kept us engaged. But then something changed. The problems for this game really started with the PlayStation Network controversy. When they forced you to have a PlayStation Network account in order to play the game, they banned like 165 countries because for whatever reason Sony didn't operate there. And it just felt like Sony the corporation was weaseling its way into our fun game and forcing people to have a PlayStation account. And let's be real here. This game massively exceeded expectations, which is why the PlayStation Network account requirement wasn't in place when the game launched. No one expected this game to perform as well as it did, including the developers, by the way. And once Sony saw how many people were buying this game, they saw the opportunity to harvest data from all 12 million players. And if you didn't know already, data is king. Just ask Mark Zuckerberg. So, Sony the corporation forced you to have the PlayStation account so they can take your data and use it. And if 165 countries were lost in the shuffle, Sony the corporation didn't care. Japan was one of those countries, by the way, and Japan has to play Helldivers 2 on its own servers. Think about that. This whole debacle was ground zero. Everything before this event was the golden age of Helldivers 2. The first few patches came and the tone shifted. Initially, I welcomed the changes. I mean, at first when they nerfed the breaker and the railgun, that sucked, but at the same time, I knew that the game wouldn't be sustainable long term if everyone was just using the breaker shotgun and the railgun, which at that time, that's what everyone was using, and there was no other loadout that could compete with that. So the first couple patches were kind of balancing the game so everyone didn't just take the same loadout. It was fixing crashes, and overall, it felt good. But soon, it felt like the devs were going way overboard, and they were trying to create a game that they wanted rather than a game that their audience wanted. They weren't just tuning things down, they were taking the fun out of the game. I'm talking about nerf after nerf. We've all seen the videos where everybody's shitting on the devs for nerfing everything, and all those videos are true. The devs did nerf everything, and they really started to take a lot of the fun out of the game. And to add insult to injury, the devs were publicly saying that, no, we're not going to nerf anything else. We're just buffing things. We're just buffing things. Oh, there's more buffs than there are nerfs. When the buffs that they're talking about were to weapons that were already shit, and even after the buffs, they were still shit. And the nerfs were on all of our favorite weapons. And that's not to mention all the crashing that took place. I mean, so many crashes since the game launched. It felt like every patch introduced new crashes. And while some crashes would be fixed, others would still be in place that they said they were going to fix. The crashing was an issue, but when the game was so much fun, you didn't really care about the crashing or notice it as much. But as they continued to nerf weapons and make the game less and less fun, all that crashing became more of an issue. And we also have to mention the ragdoll physics. Like at first, the ragdoll physics were fun because of all the clips that could be made and all the funny things that would happen. And again, when the game is fun, you can look past the little issues that happen in any game, but when the game is less fun, all those little issues start to become more apparent. The ragdoll physics, the crashing, trying to use a stem, but you're not actually using the stem even though you heard the sound cue. All those little things become a much bigger deal. And during this time, not everything was bad. I mean, they added new enemies like the Factory Strider, which was awesome. They added new types of missions that fit into the overall story. I mean, a lot of things were going going right, but at the same time, the things that were going wrong made it a lot more difficult to enjoy all these new cool things, because while these cool things are happening, the game is getting nerfed into oblivion. And all of this led up to the Escalation of Freedom update on August 6th, which was supposed to fix all these issues, add a new difficulty setting, add new enemies, and was supposed to make the game fun again. They claimed it would improve the game, but instead it again nerfed some of the most beloved weapons, including my personal favorite weapon against bugs, the flamethrower. I mean, they completely destroyed it. It was horrible. They changed the flames visual effects, which made it look like shit. They nerfed the actual damage of the flamethrower to where it was basically completely useless. Think about this. Arrowhead released the Escalation of Freedom update and a fire-themed war bond, but the Escalation of Freedom update nerfed fire. Like, what the hell were they thinking? The Steam reviews had long since turned negative, and you could see it on social media. People were leaving the game. Some were leaving loudly, some quietly, but everyone was just kind of quitting. And that's what hurts most. Helldivers 2 was losing its most passionate players. For those of us who stuck around, it felt like Arrowhead was constantly missing the mark. Each new patch took something else that we loved away, and it was clear that the developers just weren't listening. They had their vision for the game, but that vision seemed to come at the expense of the player's experience. And the gap between what the developers thought was, quote, good balance and what we wanted to play kept growing wider. But then something happened. Maybe it was the dwindling player base or the constant criticism online, but Arrowhead started to listen. Now fast forward to September 17th, and we finally got an update that didn't feel like a kick in the teeth. The September patch, it's a game changer. Let's start with the buffs. Arrowhead realized that they had taken things way too far. Weapons that were once nerfed into oblivion have been brought back to life. The flamethrower was back in full force with a revert to the old visual effects, the old damage, and it now had the ability to melt heavy enemies again. The breaker shotgun is finally back with boosted damage, improved ammo economy, and better stagger force. The eruptor, now with the shrapnel damage restored, is once again a crowd clearing beast. It feels like we've been given back our power, and trust me, it is noticeable. And it's not just the weapons. The enemies have been rebalanced too. The Bile Titan, that unkillable nightmare, now has reduced armor and his weak spots are more exposed. The automaton units have been reworked to make them less frustrating to fight, and suddenly those impossible battles on Super Helldive now feel like difficult challenges rather than a death march. They didn't just patch the game, they acknowledged the community's frustrations, and they're trying to make it right. And the result, we're starting to see players come back. Just recently we had over 100,000 players in the game again, which is insane. Social media is starting to turn positive again, with many players cautiously optimistic about the future of the game. I've seen more and more squads popping up, and discussion in forums feel positive for the first time in months. People are experimenting with different loadouts again, diving into the game with fresh eyes, and honestly, it feels like Helldivers 2 has a chance to reclaim its spot in the co-op horde shooter space. Now, I'm not saying everything is perfect. There are still issues to work out, and some players have moved on for good. But for those of us who have stuck around, it feels like this might be the beginning of a comeback. This September patch is a reminder of why we fell in love with Helldivers 2 in the first place. It's chaotic, it's punishing, but most importantly, it's fun again. So the big question is, are you diving back in? For me, after 400 hours of ups and downs, I think the game is finally heading in the right direction. I'm excited to see what comes next, and I'll be out there, gun in hand, fighting for Super Earth once again. Alright everyone, those are my thoughts on Helldivers 2. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and also make sure to let me know in the comments what you think. I want to know if you think Helldivers 2 can be saved, if this update is the first step in the right direction, and just let me know your thoughts. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.